Behavioural economics on a post-it number 12, disappointment theory. Disappointment theory was developed by, like regret theory that I talked about in the previous post-it note, was developed by Robert Sugden and Graham Looms in the early 1980s. Now, in standard rational choice theory, it's assumed that if people face an option or are considering an option that has many different possible outcomes, then people will attach some kind of subjective value or utility to each of those possible outcomes. And then they'll weight their utility or subjective value of each outcome by the probability, the likelihood, the probability that each of those outcomes will occur. And from that, they can get some subjective value or utility or expected utility for the whole of the option that they face. Disappointment theory differs from that because it assumes that when people are faced with an option that has many possible outcomes, that people will attach what's called a basic expected value, almost like slightly like a rule of thumb, I suppose, a basic expected value to what they think that the option is most likely to deliver. And then they'll compare each of the possible outcomes from the option with that basic expected value. And then they'll have emotions related to those comparisons that will cause them to modify their overall sort of utility, if you like, of the option that they face. That is to say, if they consider a possible option that's better than their basic expected value, what they think that the outcome is most likely to deliver, then they'll attach what's called an anticipated sense of elation to the possibility of that particular outcome occurring. And if there's outcomes that do produce anticipated elation, that will lead them to modify their overall subjective value for the option as a whole upwards. Conversely, if there are possible options that are worse than their basic expected value of that option, if there are outcomes that are worse, then they'll attach anticipated senses of disappointment to those particular outcomes, which is where the theory gets its name from, disappointment theory. And those anticipated disappointments will lead them to modify their overall subjective value for the whole option downwards. Right? And those kind of, if you like, those emotional reactions of anticipated disappointment and anticipated elation are not picked up in standard rational choice theory. So I'll try to illustrate disappointment theory with a simple example, hypothetical example, that is an example that nevertheless I think that many of you might be able to relate to in your real lives. So imagine that you are waiting, that you're thinking about going into town, for instance, from where you live, and you're thinking about, should I walk or should I take the bus? In this sense, you see this badly drawn bus. Let's assume that's a real bus. So you're thinking A or B, should I walk or should I take the bus? Let's just think about the option B of taking the bus. So that's your option. And there's a couple of possible outcomes that could be associated with you taking the bus in this instance. I'm going to just limit it to two possible outcomes, i.e. that the bus will arrive on time, or that the bus will be 30 minutes late or significantly late. Now, you know from your previous experience that most of the time, in fact, you think 9 out of 10 times, the bus is at least almost on time. So let's just approximate that. The bus comes on time sort of 9 out of 10 times, right? Yet you also know that 1 in 10 times the bus is, quite a bit late, significantly late. In this case, we put 30 minutes late, right? So you're thinking about option B. Should I take the bus or not, right? So you're thinking, okay, the bus is usually on time. In fact, it's nearly always on time, 9 out of 10 times. So my basic expected value is that the bus will be on time. That's what I kind of expect in this case, Right? So that's your basic expected value in this case for option B. Then you think about, the possible outcomes that could occur, and you compare those in your own mind to the basic expected value. So you're thinking, okay, 9 out of 10 times it is on time. So when you're thinking about it, the possibility of it being on time, that's not really associated in this case, in this hypothetical case, with any anticipated disappointment or anticipated elation. You're expecting it to be on time. That's your basic expected value. And 9 out of 10 times it will be on time. Right? But 1 in 10 times, you're thinking, it's late, significantly late. And when you compare that to your basic expected value that it will be on time, the possibility of that outcome occurring feeds you with quite a significant sense of anticipated disappointment in the possibility that particular outcome will occur, right? And that anticipated sense of disappointment that you're thinking about can significantly modify downwards your overall subjective value of option B, sort of waiting for and taking the bus. Right? Might modify it down significantly enough for you to decide to walk instead. Right, so those, and this is all that I've said there, I've just written down in sort of words here, so I won't repeat all of this sort of stuff. But, as I said at the beginning of this little video, that anticipated sense of disappointment in this instance is not picked up in standard economic theory, and yet it might have a substantive influence upon which overall option you decide to take. Okay, so there we have it, disappointment theory.